Defiance in Denmark. Early one April morning in 1940, the skies over Denmark were filled with German aircraft. Swooping down close to the ground, the planes dumped thousands of green leaflets. The people were to remain calm, the messages read. There was nothing to fear from the Germans of the Third Reich. But within hours, Denmark was swarming with tanks, SS troops, and Gestapo police, who quickly defeated the Danish army. Without warning, Denmark had been invaded and conquered. The Germans went to work immediately, making noisy speeches in public gathering places and handing out anti-Semitic literature encouraging the isolation of Jews from Danish society. But the campaign against the Jews backfired. The Germans had counted on the kind of cooperation they had had in their own country and in Eastern Europe. Denmark was different. Its Jewish population of roughly 8,000 had been totally integrated since the early part of the 19th century. Danes were Danes, whether they were Jews, Catholics, Protestants, or otherwise. During the 1930s, Christian X, King of Denmark, had warned the German ambassador to Denmark that anti-Semitism was unacceptable. And as news about the violent raids against the Jews in Germany spread, the Danes were angry and ashamed. In ceremonies marking the 100th anniversary of the Great Crystal Synagogue in Copenhagen, the king defied the actions and participated in the services, accompanied by his entire family. This mistake on the part of the Germans combined with another unusual situation. The Danes were considered by the Nazis to be purely Aryan like themselves, so when the people of Denmark openly defended the Jews, the Germans changed their tactics. Until 1943, no Jewish businesses were shut down. University professors and other people of influence continued their work, and synagogues stayed open. Then came the new orders from the German High Command. In 1943, the Danish government was ordered to begin legislation against the Jews. Ghettos were to be established, and the Yellow Star of David was to be worn by every Jew. The Danes took to the streets in protest, and bishops and clergy throughout the country took to their pulpits. King Christian offered to move into a ghetto, declaring that it would be an honor to wear the Jewish star. Tensions mounted. When scores of Danish army officers were arrested, the Navy sank its own entire fleet. The Danish resistance, which for some time had been helping Jews leave the country, began sabotaging German bases, stealing weapons, and instigating riots and strikes in major cities. On August 29, 1943, the Danish government resigned and the Nazis took control, finalizing plans for the deportation of Denmark's Jews to the death camps. The Germans secretly set October 1st, the beginning of the Jewish New Year, as the date for the roundups, knowing that the Jews would be easy targets as they gathered in homes and synagogues for the holy days. And then some unexpected events took place. Helmut von Moltke, a German count, found out about the plan through his underground spy network and got word to the Danish resistance. He was later executed. At the same time, a German shipping magnate in Copenhagen named George von Duckwitz received a top-secret letter from Berlin ordering him to prepare 4 of his largest ships for the deportation of Denmark's Jews. At enormous personal risk, the businessman passed the information on to the Swedish ambassador and 2 members of the former Danish government. By sundown on the evening before Rosh Hashanah, warnings of the scheduled roundups spread to the Danes, who went to their Jewish friends to offer their homes as shelter until a means of escape could be found. That same night, while Danes were literally pulling their Jewish neighbors off the streets, a small group of resistance fighters met at the home of the Bishop of Copenhagen to agree upon plans for a daring rescue operation. Under cover of darkness, the Jews would be taken across the sea to Sweden, a neutral country that had offered to give safe haven to war refugees. Transportation would be by private vessels, motorboats, yachts, fishing boats, and even rowboats would be used. The Danes went into action. For the next 3 months, one of the war's most extraordinary sea rescues took place. Night after night, thousands of tiny vessels stole past enemy warships. When the mission was finally completed, 8,000 Jews had been saved. Throughout that time, citizens of all ages in Denmark showed remarkable courage. Once a group of young students broke into Copenhagen's Crystal Synagogue and removed 100 Torah scrolls, prayer books, and other precious treasures, storing them in the cellars of Protestant churches throughout the city. Another time, the minister of a remote village church hid one of the country's leading rabbis, along with his entire family. Peter Forchen, the famous explorer, was arrested twice for rescuing Jews. escaped both times, despite the fact that the Germans had removed his wooden leg to keep him from running away. Jürgen Keeler, his brother, and his two sisters were college students sharing a small apartment in the city of Copenhagen. As members of the resistance, their quarters were a meeting place for other students and cadets involved in the rescue missions. Their apartment housed an important underground printing office and a hoard of weapons stolen from the Nazis. Making contact with some fishermen and the crew of a small boat that ferried supplies to a lighthouse between Denmark and Sweden, Jürgen and his sisters mapped out 2 evacuation routes leading from the city. Then, 2 of the students stationed themselves at a hiding place on the shoreline where they sheltered escaping Jews until a rescue boat arrived. 1,500 Jews were eventually saved. One member of Keeler's team didn't live to see the end of the war. Cato Bachmann, a medical student who operated the printing presses, was discovered as he worked in the apartment of a surgeon at the Bispebjerg Hospital. Shot while trying to escape through an open window, the young man died a few hours later as an emergency room nurse held him in her arms. He and the nurse had married less than a month before. The Danish people continued their support and compassion for the Jews after the Germans were defeated. As the refugees returned, each was given 4,050 kroner by the Danish government. Homes that had not been destroyed by the Nazis were given back to their Jewish owners. Many Jews found that their lawns and gardens had been carefully tended and their refrigerators were filled with food. A Jewish girl who had been one of several hundred captured by the Germans was met by her neighbors, given flowers, and presented with the keys to her apartment. Inside, on her kitchen table, was an envelope containing a large sum of money collected by people in the neighborhood. Near the envelope was a note. "This is for your initial expenses." Here's a picture of Willie Mink and Mrs. Willie Mink. And this picture's caption is "The house in Amsterdam, Netherlands, where Anne Frank and her family hid from the Nazis."